Greetings, I'm Laura Bassett with From the Ground Up, and we're talking about spring cleanups. Yes, it's that time of year again, and we interviewed Stephen Rochlin with Planterra Landscapes to talk about a couple of things that you want to be doing right now to suppress weeds and to feed your plants for the next year. So let's get on over to what he says and some suggestions that you can even do from home.
I think the spring checklist is one of those things that people are cognizant of when they're
Mm,
doing, when they're looking at their garden this time of year. Obviously, there's everything is blooming, the weeds are going crazy. It's like it's just right in front of your face. The one thing that comes up year after year is like, okay, so I've got these aphids, or I've got these bugs on my roses, and that's always a perennial problem where people are
mm-hmm.
asking about that. So addressing the basic mindset of your spring cleaning and getting your whole garden dialed in is kind of a big one for people. And I think spending
Mm-hmm.
time at home brings that to a head, right? More people are
Right, noticing
looking out
it
their
and
window and they're like, oh man, what look at there's weeds everywhere. What am I gonna like so I get calls for that, and people ask me, like, "Hey, are you guys doing this? And do we need to feed?" And I got a lot of weeds, and what do you think about this? And so that comes up quite a bit. And number one is weed prevention. So we talk
right.
about some of the things that we can do now to prevent weeds, and it's always a good conversation that comes around to adding mulch at a time of year like in the
Mm-hmm.
fall and the winter when it's a good time to do it because then that prevents the weeds from coming up in the spring. It keeps it to a
Yeah.
minimum. So it's always a good starter conversation when you have a lot of weeds in the yard and they're like, well, what do we do about this? Yeah, I don't really like Roundup, so let's talk about something else. What are our
Mm-hmm.
options? Well, because the ground's still wet, let's pull these weeds and get a jump on them, and then we'll put down a layer of mulch. It's a little bit late, but better
Yeah.
late than never. So
So speaking of mulch in the fall, I know in like farming and things like that, you put out compost in the fall, and I've worked with other people that have done a layer of compost and then a layer of mulch. Do you
yeah,
suggest doing that in the fall, kind
yeah.
of as a feeding the soil, and then everything's kind of healthy when it comes into spring? And
Yep, that is a great 1-2 punch, using the compost and then adding the mulch on top of that. And I've done it where I've just done compost and I've laid down and
hmm
surprisingly, we put down enough of it where it did a good job of weed suppression. We had it
right,
we put it down, yeah, I put it down kind of thick and it worked. I mean, it kept the weeds at bay
hmm
and then in the spring, I mean, holy guacamole, things took off. I mean, it really
right,
the garden this last season, not this one, but the one previous was like
hmm
dynamite. And all these organic fertilizers feed the soil more than they just feed the plant. So you're trying to build that and keep that biome strong in the soil so that the
hmm
flora and the fauna are doing what they have to do in order to work that symbiotic relationship with the plant. So it's important to cultivate that relationship with the plant and the soil.
right, comes back around to the mulching either in the fall or the spring is that that keeps that moisture in, which reduces cost for the client as far as watering, but it also keeps the soil healthy instead of drying out and then kind of losing some of those little microbes and things in the soil that die when it dries out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I there's a mulch after it's been down about a season, you can really see where the root system has grown up to that mulch line.
Yep.
Where it was bare soil before, when you have that first year, you're retaining moisture. If you do it at a correct depth of mulch, you're
Yep.
retaining the moisture, but you also are providing nutrients. And you can really see where those fine feeding hairs are for whatever plant is near that mulch, and that's how you know it's working because you'll usually, if everything is right, you'll have a nice fine mat of roots right in that strata where all of that decomposition and moisture set is at.
Let's dive into a little bit more about his suggestions for how you can feed your plants to make sure that they thrive over the next year. What resources do you send people to normally, and then what resources do you think we're going to need to send them to, I guess, virtually?
If I'm directing people, I say, stick with the organic stuff and really
Mm-hmm.
work it down at the base of the plant. Don't touch the stock of the trunk of the plant. Work it into the soil as best you can in the drip zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And be consistent about it, because I think for the most part you think one and done, but really you need to be consistent about feeding. Otherwise, it doesn't you're not really doing the plant justice. You're kind of wasting your time.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for sharing some of your time with us and knowledge about weed suppression and plant feeding. Obviously, there's a lot more to this subject than what we can share in such a short time. So, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Stefan and ask directly or message us, and I will pass along that message to him. We will be providing this type of content more often to give you an insider's look into the industry of landscaping here, as well as sharing a lot of that inside information with you about what you can be doing right now to ensure that your landscape stays healthy during this time of a little bit of uncertainty. So, thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time.